Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bargava and Ms. Lewis, welcome to the committee. I, too, would like to commend both of you for your longstanding commitment to public service, and I thank you for your willingness to continue that service in these new capacities. First, Ms. Bargava has been nominated to serve as the Assistant Secretary for Administration at HUD. HUD would play a central role in the Democrats' $3.5 trillion, or however many trillion it ends up being, reckless tax and spend bill, which is currently being negotiated. The plan includes $300+ billion for new spending for housing programs. Billions of this aid is not targeted. Some of these programs have weak means testing and loopholes. There are no work requirements, even for able-bodied adults with no dependents. They and many people of above-average income will do quite well under some of these programs. Let's consider several of the bill's flawed housing provisions. Start with, there's the bill's $80 billion for renovating public housing. Now, it's interesting. The Biden administration didn't even request that amount. The Biden administration requested only $40 billion. So why does the bill have $80 billion? Well, it just so happens that the New York City Housing Authority wanted $40 billion all for itself. But our Democratic colleagues couldn't very well pass a bill that sends 100% of public housing money to New York City. That'd be a bit of a problem for the 48 Democratic senators who don't represent New York. So instead, Senator Schumer promised to, quote, double down, end quote, on the administration's proposal and, quote, use all of my power as majority leader to secure a funding package that can restore and transform the New York City Housing Authority, end quote. And lo and behold, we now have $80 billion, substantially all of which will not be distributed using the existing formula, but rather by executive fiat. It certainly looks a lot like Senator Schumer securing a $40 billion earmark, or as I like to call it, a shoe mark. As a result, it appears likely that half of all the bill's public housing dollars will go to a housing authority plagued by scandals, bribery, and chronic mismanagement. It's also concerning to see Democrats intent on spending billions more on outdated public housing projects. Public housing projects concentrate poverty and crime and trap families in generational cycles of dependency and despair. 2 decades ago, both parties recognized their flaws, and that's why Congress placed a cap on the number of public housing units on a bipartisan basis with the Faircloth Amendment. But now our Democrats' colleagues' reconciliation bill would effectively repeal this cap so the new public housing units can go up. There's also the $9 billion in down payment assistance for first-time and first-generation homebuyers, except that you can qualify for this money even if you or your parents previously had a home. So much for first-time and first-generation. Oh, and you don't have to be low income to qualify. In areas like Washington, D.C., a person earning $180,000 a year could qualify. That covers pretty much every single member of Congress. Worst of all, the program is a thinly disguised attempt to give assistance to home buyers based more on the color of their skin than their financial need, something that's very likely unconstitutional. Democrat Chairwoman Maxine Waters has said the objective of this program is to help address the racial wealth and home ownership gaps. And thus the bill directs HUD to allocate funds in part based on, quote, racial disparities in home ownership rates, end quote. Now, let me be clear, increasing wealth and home ownership rates among minorities is a perfectly fine goal, but designing race-based policies and benefits is not. Now I want to turn to the EXIM Bank. Ms. Lewis has been nominated to serve as president and chair of EXIM. I continue to remain deeply skeptical of EXIM and its role in the American and global economy. Taxpayers ultimately bear the consequences of undue risks taken by EXIM. And if we want to promote domestic manufacturing and increase competitiveness of U.S. exports, as I do, what we need to do is create a favorable climate by maintaining low taxes, provide regulatory certainty, and cut red tape to attract capital formation. To claim that EXIM is needed to achieve these goals simply defies the facts. The vast majority of American exports get done without any EXIM support. We've reviewed annual data, export data, from 2007 through 2020. In that period, the highest percent of U.S. exports using EXIM financing was in 2012, and it was only 2.3%. And that was when EXIM had everything going for it. It was fully operational, it had a quorum on its board, it had not reached its lending limit. The reality is, the United States is the world's second largest exporter of goods behind only China. We lead the world in value-added exports, and we do it almost entirely without EXIM financing. Not only is EXIM financing not needed, but it's often nothing more than crony capitalism providing taxpayer-financed subsidies to some of the world's largest companies who have plenty of access to private capital. Consider EXIM's recent deal guaranteeing an $82 million loan from J.P. Morgan to Qantas Airline for the purpose of buying jets from General Electric. So let's see. J.P. Morgan is the largest bank in America. Qantas is the largest airline in Australia. And GE is one of the largest industrial companies in the world. They do not need American taxpayers' subsidies to do a deal. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from today's nominees.